Hello everyone. I want to talk a little bit more about the design flaw in the Sig P320. Okay, so there's been a big fuss in the news because there's been a number of accidents that have occurred with the P320 basically firing uncommanded, like shooting on its own. Um, and unfortunately, very recently there was an airman that lost his life. Now, people have been talking about this for a while, and as far as like different accidents that have happened, different reports, and when I first heard about them, I had like pretty much poo-pooed them as user error, uh, and this is a mistake on me, but I had assumed that all striker fired guns had the safety mechanisms that Glock had, right? Because Glock is kind of like the granddaddy of striker fired guns, right? So with the Glock, there's three safety mechanisms that are built into the gun. Number one, there's a trigger safety. So if you hold this, let's say from the side, and you pull it back, it's not going to go click because you have to push on that middle leaf. And so that's the first safety. The second safety is when you rack the slide, it is not fully cocked. It is partially cocked, all right, somewhere around 55%. Some people have said 58%. I mean, but it is partially cocked, so it is not a fully cocked gun. And the idea there is that if the striker were to slip off the sear, it should not have enough energy to go forward and hit the primer and set it off. Okay, so that's kind of the idea with it. That when you rack your slide and there's a round sitting in your chamber, you are only half cocked. When you press the trigger, okay, you complete the cocking action. All right, so kind of like if you got a bow and arrow, right? You got your bow here, you pull it back halfway, you only got half the energy there. In order to like really let go, you got to pull it back all the way. So same deal here. When you press the trigger, you are fully cocking and creating the tension that is required to set off that primer. Okay, and the third safety mechanism is the firing pin block. The firing pin block. Get behind the camera here, right? So basically, that's this thing over here. So what happens when you press the trigger, right? When you press the trigger, this shark fin comes back over here, right? It goes forward. The shark fin over here has to come back, and it basically presses up, right? That little fin there presses up on this safety here, which pushes it, right? Pushes on that, where are you? Right there. Pushes up on that, which basically moves it out of the way, right? I'm going to push it with my finger here. Moves it out of the way so the firing pin can come through, right? You can see how, oh, there it is, it came through, right? You see how the firing pin comes through, right? So if I don't push down on that button there, right, and I push forward, it's not going to come through. Okay, so I have to push down on this, and only then will the firing pin comes through the hole. So those are your three safeties that are built into the Glock, into your Glock, right? So what I just recently found out a few days ago is that in the Sig 320, they've removed two of these safeties, right? They removed the trigger safety, right? That little leaf over here, right? And they removed the partial cocking so that the gun is fully cocked, okay? So once you rack that slide, it is under full tension, and it stays under full tension until you fire a round. So that came as a surprise to me, okay? And, of course, when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, well, of course they're gonna have accidents, right? They've removed two of the safety mechanisms on this gun that should be there, right? They removed the trigger safety, and they removed the partial cocking, and it is now a fully cocked striker fire gun. So they're relying on that safety plunger, of course they're gonna have accidents, okay? But then even more surprising, okay, I found out that a lot of the other striker-fired guns out there are also fully cocked or fully charged, okay, which really came as a surprise to me. It's like, holy shit, you know, I'm surprised that like more of these guns aren't going off. Okay, so the thing to realize here is that these problems with the Sig 320, the only reason why they came to light is because the military adopted the Sig 320, right, in the M17 and the M18, and they started using it on a wide scale, using, abusing, misusing, neglecting, right? All this stuff needs to be factored into the equation, okay? And because of all these things that happened in the military, all of a sudden you started having these problems, okay? So, you know, people say, hey, I've got this gun or that gun, right? Because I didn't know, like, for example, that the M&P guns, right, are fully cocked guns, right? Like, I've got one over here. I actually carried this one around for almost a year back in 2020. So you know, there's a little bit when you press the trigger, there's a little bit of play there. It kind of feels like Glock-like to me. So I made the mistake. Okay, the mistake of assuming that slack is completing the cocking action. And now that I look at it and I feel it, it's like, no, that's not what's happening. This is a fully, I suspect, this is a fully cocked gun, okay? And then when you press the trigger, you know, it's under full tension and you're releasing it, okay? You're not completing the cocking action. So even though I've carried this gun, I've done lots of shooting with this gun, I suspect that if the military was to adopt this gun, all right, and have like several, whatever, hundreds of thousands of them, millions, I don't know how many they would purchase, but if the military were to adopt this gun on a wide scale and put it through the typical high use, abuse, neglect, right, failing to clean the gun when it's supposed to be cleaned, failing to change out the parts when they're supposed to be changed out after certain round counts, I suspect that at some point this gun would start going off on its own as well, right? Because it is a fully cocked gun, okay, when you rack the slide. And that is the problem. So the reason why I'm doing this video, because this is like right after I did a 40-minute video yesterday on the Sig 320, and you know, I'm continuing to collect information, and it's not just a thing that, hey, this is what Sig did with their 320. This is what a lot of gun manufacturers have started doing, right? They're making these fully charged, fully cocked striker-fired guns. And I mean, yeah, you might have one that, hey, never had a problem. In fact, I would expect that they can put a few 100,000 of them out there and they're not going to have a problem. You know, it's not until you get like into that really high use, you know, high use, abuse, neglect, that you start running into those kind of problems. Okay, so that's so the purpose of this video is to like look at your handgun, right, and really understand how does it work. What are the safety mechanisms of this gun, right? So when I rack the slide on this gun, that is a fully cocked gun. That is no different than this revolver here, right, where I cock this. Right? Would I now put this loaded into a holster, you know, pointing at my foot? And the answer to this is absolutely not. I would not do this. The only way I would carry this gun is with the hammer down, where the safety mechanism is that hammer has to come all the way back, right? I have to put energy into this to bring that hammer back before it releases, okay? So that is the reason why, you know, I carry this Glock 43, right? Because right now it is only partially cocked, and when I press the trigger, it completes the cocking action. And before I started carrying these striker-fired guns, I would only carry double action only handguns, right? So basically, whether they were originally I was carrying revolvers. I even at one point I had carried a single action revolver, but of course the hammer is down. So like with a single action revolver, basically pulling the hammer and squeezing the trigger are like almost a single action, right? Like I wouldn't pull the hammer until I'm ready to basically press the trigger. This is a double action, so I can carry this with the hammer down. So I was carrying double action guns, and it wasn't until I really started getting into Glocks and started building them that I understood how the partial cocking mechanism worked, and how how this has three safeties, right? You got the trigger safety, you got the fact that it's partially cocked, and you've got that firing pin block. At that point, I said, okay, yeah, I feel comfortable with this. I can carry this. And on top of that, you've got the holster, right? Because the form-fitted holster, right, that is an important part of the safety feature of this gun, right? This holster protects the gun. When I go home at night, I don't take the gun out of the holster. This thing comes off my belt, goes into the safe. Next morning, goes back, on my belt like this. I don't remove the gun from the holster, which is the safety mechanism, until I get to a gun range where I can shoot it. Okay. So that's the thing. So I was actually surprised, because I had assumed when I was carrying this M&P Shield 9 that when you rack the slide, that this is a partially cocked gun. And I'm pretty sure I am wrong. Not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that I was wrong on that. Just now feeling the trigger and saying, yeah, that shit's not doing anything. That's a single action gun. This is no different than this 1911, right? When you rack the slide, okay, the hammer is back, which is no different than racking the slide on this. The firing pin is back. It's just that you can't see it on this. It's internal, okay? You get that. Here, the hammer is back. Now on your 1911, right, you've got two external safeties, right? You've got the back strap safety. This basically when you press this, that disengages the safety on the trigger. So this is a trigger safety. The thumb safety on this is a sear block. Okay, so that actually would prevent the sear from releasing, right? That's what the thumb safety is. Now on the P320, the safety on that is only a trigger block. Okay, it doesn't stop the sear. So you could have your safety on in the on position, and the internal parts that basically the firing pin can still move. Okay, it doesn't stop the firing pin from moving. So the thumb safety on the Sig 320 is really not as effective as the safety on stops. It's actually a sear block. Okay, now that all said, there's a couple of times when I did carry a 1911, I was doing a class on it. I wore a holster that actually had a strap, a leather strap that basically went back here in front of the hammer, right? And they would buckle into position, because I didn't fully trust this, right? I've seen plenty of times where people are carrying this and the safety is off, either because they forget to put the safety on or because the safety hits something and it comes off. So I never trusted the safety, partially because of human error, partially because, again, it can get hit or whatever. So when I did carry a 1911, I had a holster that had I forgot what you call it, but basically had a hammer block strap over here. So, and even if you go back to like World War I, World War II, a lot of guys carried this on an empty chamber, right? Because they didn't trust the gun, okay? Right or wrong, they didn't trust the gun. Maybe they didn't trust themselves with it, whatever. But a lot of guys carried this on an empty chamber. So if you're not going to trust this, which has like two external safeties on it, like why would you trust, something, let's say like this, that has no safeties on it? It's fully cocked. The only safety feature on this is really the firing pin block, okay, which can fail, right? And the holster, right? You got to carry this in a form-fitted holster. That now, if you look on the 320, let me take this apart. The plunger safety is actually part of the firing pin mechanism. It's actually part of it. There's like this thin little spring there. It actually looks kind of flimsy, so I can see how it can fail. Okay, the firing pin block on this Glock clone over here is separate, and it's a lot more robust. So I would definitely trust this a lot more. So yeah, so the purpose of this video is not so much to talk about the flaw in the design of the Sig 320, but just talk about in general this just general concept that apparently exists that I wasn't even fully aware that it existed to the scale, where you've got manufacturers selling striker-fired guns that basically become fully cocked when you rack the slide. And yeah, I mean that's just like I mean it's kind of like rolling the dice. I mean, you may not have a problem a million times, but a million and one time you may have a problem. Now, as far as Glocks, because here's the thing, I'm actually not a Glock fanboy. These are all P80s that I have built. There's a couple of things that I don't love the angle of the Glocks. So all these guys here, I have built, and when I was building them back in 2020 and 2021, you could not find a Glock factory parts. Okay, so all the internals on all of these guns are all aftermarket, the cheapest eBay crap that I could find. Okay, and to prove it to you guys, I got here a whole collection of firing pins, okay, that have broken, right? If you look over here, if you look at the tips over here, let me get behind the camera so we got focus. All these firing pins here, the heads have broken off. Okay, so this is the, this is the common problem that I find that I have with aftermarket Glock parts. Now, the rest of the parts in these guns are fine. I haven't had any problems. So that's the one part that was breaking. Again, with the cheapest aftermarket parts that I could get. And as far as round counts, this one's got 10,000 plus. This one's got 10,000 plus rounds. I use these guns to train people, right? Do I have one? This one has 10,000 plus rounds. Okay, so back in 2020, in 7 days a week, from like almost from from like 10 o'clock all the way until like 8 o'clock at night, right? For almost whatever, for almost 8 months straight. I ran up some pretty high round counts on these guns. So they all have about 10,000 rounds each. And I know because I know how much ammo I was buying, right? I was buying my ammo like 4,000 rounds at a time, right? 1,000 round boxes. I was getting 4 of them at a time. That's how busy I was back in 2020. So that's how I managed to break these firing pins so quickly. When they broke, I replaced them with the billet striker fired ones. The billet striker fires from AIM Surplus, those have held up really good. Okay, those billet ones, once I put those in, never had a problem. But that's the only part that has failed on these guns. But here's the thing, though, with all these parts that broke, right, when it broke, the gun didn't shoot on its own. Okay, in fact, let's take a step back. When I was building these guns, right, and I was going through a debugging process, right, all these guns. Like when I built them, because basically I had to build the lower, I had to make it fit rather I had to build the frame, I had to make sure that the slide was running smooth on it, and a lot of times, usually when I got the gun together, there was a lot of debugging involved with it. There was a lot of times there was friction between the slide and the frame, and I had to do a lot of work on it to get it smooth, right? There was a couple of times where I had I talked about this in another video. I put in the safety plunger spring sideways, and what that did is it forced the striker fired in the forward position, so it was stuck forward. So after you fire the first round, the striker is forward. So as the slide is running back and forth, it's basically slam firing. So you're shooting like 2 and 3 round bursts. Sometimes you're dumping the whole magazine. So going through the debugging process, I ran into all sorts of problems that I had to debug on these guns that I built myself. But not once, with all these problems that I had, did the gun fire on its own. Usually what happened is the gun just didn't work. Okay, the slide wasn't running back and forth. And the reason for that is because when you rack the slide, it is only partially charged, right? It's only when like I'm pointing the gun at the target and I put my finger on the trigger, you know, and I start and I pick up the slack. Only at that point is the, you know, the firing pin fully charged, where it can set off the primer, right? And at that point, I'm actually pointing at the target. So it doesn't matter if the gun starts, you know, if it has a defect which starts doing full auto or whatever. It doesn't matter because I'm actually pointing it at the target. Okay. So now with a lot of these guns, they've been dropped, right? So the fact that this has the trigger safety here, that prevents the gun from going off. For some crazy reason, Sig decided not to have a trigger safety on their trigger. This Shield 9 does have, it's got the knuckle one over here, so it does have a trigger safety where if I don't push on this part here, the trigger won't move back. So I don't know why Sig would have done something like that. Now I'm not a Sig hater. Like, I got this other Sig here, mag out. I got this other Sig here. This is the SP320, right? So this gun works great. I mean, but this one is a double action, single action, right? So when you rack the slide, right, the hammer is back, right? You got to decock it. So you're carrying this with the hammer down. First shot is a long hard pull, right? That's your double action. Then after your first shot, basically now you're in single action mode. So now you've got a really light trigger pull. So here's the thing: when you go to holster this gun, right, you decock it, right? You would not put this gun in your holster with the hammer back, right? I mean, you wouldn't do that. So why would you do that with a Sig 320, right? Why would you put that in your holster with the firing pin back fully charged? And forget about a Sig 320. Why would you do that with any gun, an M&P or a an H&K or FN or any company? I don't care whose name is on the gun. Why would you put a gun in the holster where the firing pin is fully charged? Okay, because now you're what? You're really depending on the safety the mechanical safety mechanisms of the gun. Like me personally, if I put the gun in a holster, I prefer that the gun not have enough energy built into the gun, right? So that if the hammer or the firing pin drops, it could set it off. Okay, but that's me. So, hey everyone, I want to add one thing real quick. Okay, if you have a Glock or a Glock clone, right, and you change the trigger out so that it is lighter than it's supposed to be, or so that it charges more than the factory setting, okay, you're defeating the safety mechanism of the gun. Okay, so there's lots of aftermarket Glock triggers that are supposed to be easier, more comfortable to shoot, but yeah, there's a cost benefit there. You get a lighter trigger, you start moving more towards a fully charged, single action trigger, but you're giving up the safety mechanism. And anyway, the purpose of this video again was not to so much talk about the Sig 320, because we talked about that in the last video. Lots of people have talked about the Sig 320, although a lot of people have been talking about problems with the Sig 320. I don't think they've identified the problem as the gun being fully charged. Okay, that's the problem with the gun. Okay, and people are like, oh, but again, like I said, there's all these other companies that make fully charged guns that fully charge, right, when you rack the slide, and they don't have problems. But I'm almost 100% sure that if the military were to adopt them, they would start having problems, because there's just too small of a margin for error, right? You've got to make sure if the gun is fully charged, all the internal safeties have to be working 100%. And if you know anything about machines, machines don't work 100% all the time. Okay, so anyway, something for you guys to think about. Think about what gun you're carrying, and when you rack the slide, what's the condition of that gun? Okay, does it have enough energy to actually set a round off when it's in the holster? Okay, so drop some comments. Talk to you all soon.